Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. I'm your host, Tom Rogan. Joining us this week are the familiar faces of Eleanor Clift, Clarence Page, and Pat Buchanan. And our guest this week is Alexander Heffner, host of The Open Mind on PBS. On that note, we should get to our first issue, which is Issue 1, Federal Factor.
Protests in Portland, Oregon have occurred every day since late May. While some have been peaceful, others have resorted to anarchist violence. That motivated President Trump to send in federal law enforcement officers. But while Portland's mayor and Oregon's governor are protesting the federal deployment, Trump says he's ready to send federal law enforcement teams to other cities that are experiencing crime waves. Chicago, for example.
Pat, one of the interesting things here is the dichotomy between President Trump, mayors like the Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, who said about 30 minutes after a shooting, which he obviously had not been briefed about, where 15 people were shot at a funeral home, this was Gestapo-like tactics. I mean, why is this so divisive, do you think?
Well, it's a real political issue. Let's take the Portland issue. Quite frankly, the federal agents were sent into Portland because the Mark Hatfield building was in trouble. It was being abused and attacked at night, and the mayor wasn't doing the job in protecting it, and so they sent those folks in there. But the overall thing here, Tom, is that what Trump is doing, he's putting a spotlight by sending these agents in there, some of them working with folks, as in Chicago, to underscore the fact that the liberal Democratic mayors cannot control outrageous riots. They cannot control crime, which has gotten totally out of hand with this defund the police. And Trump is turning this, using federal folks, into an issue between us and them. We can handle law and order, and these folks have proven over the years that they can't do the job.
Eleanor.
Well, let's start with Portland first as well. The president is treating the Homeland Security operatives as though they're his private militia. Yes, there is it's constitutional to protect a federal building, but that constitutional authority ends at the steps of the bottom of that building. And instead, they went out into the community in camouflage, fully armed, picking up protesters and carrying them away in unmarked cars. Frankly, if this were a normal administration in normal times, maybe the Chicago mayor would welcome this. You're correct, 15 people were shot overnight. But she doesn't even know what those federal agents are going in there to do. What she would like them to do is to interrupt the gun smuggling. 60% of the guns come from neighboring states and are flooding Chicago. So there's room to help. But here I agree with Pat. This is a political move to draw a line between Democrat-led cities, i.e. urban centers, and an administration that is hoping to erase the view of his leadership on the coronavirus and substitute law and order.
Mr. Chicago, Clarence Page, your thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
I like that title, Tom, Mr. Chicago. I'll take it. Let me say, breaking news, Lori Lightfoot, first of all, when she was talking about Gestapo tactics, she was talking about what the agents did out there in Portland. And that there you had a peaceful setting, which was interrupted by tear gas, etc., late at night by federal agents. That's the term we journalists use. But getting back to Chicago, quietly after the bombast between Mayor Lightfoot and President Trump, quietly Wednesday, they talked on the phone. And Trump agreed with Lightfoot that there will not be a Gestapo or police rolling in like military troops in camouflage uniforms. They were going to work with the Chicago police. They were going to work with the U.S. attorney. But Lori Lightfoot trusts, because guess what? Lori is a former prosecutor herself. She worked with the current U.S. attorney. She is not the disband the police kind of candidate that President Trump makes her out to be. And they talked peacefully and productively and arranged for the federal officers to work with Chicago PD in dealing with these crimes, which are not military crimes. They are street gangs, or they are domestic problems out in the neighborhoods. And Chicago's always ready to get some help with a problem like this, but not just to be a political stunt.
Alexander, is there a danger here, though, with Democrats calling police officers, federal agents, Gestapo, the people which bring to memory by history, you know, taking Jews in the middle of the night and throwing them in concentration camps, torturing people, that they play to that narrative that President Trump presents of Democrats are anti-police, anti-law and order, and not pro-police reform and pro-better civil society relations?
Tom, I think this is going to backfire spectacularly if the federal authorities continue to be deployed to these Democratic cities, because the imagery you're seeing out of Portland is the disorder that Donald Trump owns. So if he thinks he's playing a Nixon game here, a tactic, Clarence is right. This is ill-fated, just as the visit to the church in DC was ill-fated, with a massive popular uprising against these kinds of tactics and gassing largely peaceful protesters. Now, there can be a conversation, an honest conversation, about who's instigating what in Portland with respect to defacement of federal property or trespassing of federal property. But the bottom line is, this is not a winning issue for the president unless he intends to take it to every major city and the Supreme Court and Bill Barr together uphold these kinds of tactics all the way through Election Day to try to supervise the election. And that is the great fear of not just liberals, but constitutionalists, proponents of law and order. But Donald Trump, just as much as he owns the Trump virus, he owns this disorder, this lawlessness and disorder in Portland, and he'll own it in Chicago and anywhere else he sends troops.
Pat, I'm sure you agree with all of that, right?
Let me say that is, it's an absurdity. Donald Trump is not responsible for Portland. Now let's see what we're talking about. The Speaker of the House referred to American law enforcement agents as stormtroopers. Jim Clyburn said Nazi Gestapo. These are fellow Americans who are enforcing the law as best they can. Let's talk about Clarence's Chicago. On the weekend, last weekend, there were 70 people shot and 20 of them were dead. On Monday, there were 25 shot. On Tuesday, there were 15 people shot at a funeral in something that made the Valentine's Day massacre look like a tea party. This is what's going on in America. And what we hear is people are griping and moaning and groaning because Trump's sending in some federal people. Do you really think these folks that work for the federal government are Nazi stormtroopers? I think it's appalling, and it's gone higher and higher because of this defund the police movement. I think it's a tremendous issue, an important issue, in both in policy and political terms. Trump is right.
I'd like to point out that domestic policing is not a federal responsibility. This is unconstitutional. And if people are using those kinds of terms, you know, I remember Republicans using jackbooted when Democrats sent federal troops into various areas. There's a genuine concern about how this president is undermining the Constitution. This is a very authoritarian move. He had the guise of protecting the federal building in Portland, but now he's got crime fighting. What's happening in these cities is not new.
Clarence, concluding comment.
I can only imagine that if President Obama had ordered troops into various cities without consulting the local government, how do you think they'd react? You'd be hearing once again the same kind of stormtrooper rhetoric. I think for good reason. It is unconstitutional, and it's an obvious election time stunt. And it's sad that President Trump, after 4 years, hasn't found something new to say on these issues. He just goes back to the same old tropes because he's digging deeper into his base now, rather than even try to get crossover appeal. And that's what's really sad and tragic about all this.
Alexander, very quick.
I echo what Clarence said. Look, we know that there's pernicious crime in these cities. By amplifying it, Trump is only going to hurt himself.
Okay. I think actually I'm going to agree with Pat on this one. Whatever his motives, and I suspect they're more political than law enforcement, In the failure of state and local authorities to protect their people, the first duty of government is to step in and do that. President Trump is right to do that. Democratic mayors have failed in this regard. Anyway, issue 2, Census Showdown.
To Democratic Party protest, President Trump this week signed a memorandum seeking to bar illegal or undocumented immigrants from being counted for the purposes of congressional redistricting. Measured as part of the census, population counts are used to reshape congressional districts. President Trump says his action is necessary to end, quote, perverse incentives, unquote, for illegal entry into the United States, but lawsuits are being filed.
Eleanor, illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, is whatever you want to call these individuals, are not eligible to vote. Why is this a problem?
I'm going to go back to the Constitution. The Constitution says we count the population, we count everybody living here, we count everybody residing in the various states. And out of that, we draw the lines for congressional districts, and we apportion federal funds for everything from, food stamps to housing assistance. So, trillions of dollars. So there's a lot at stake here. And again, this is a political move. The president wants to deny congressional seats to California, which has the most undocumented immigrants. He's tried one previous ploy, adding a citizenship question to the census questionnaire, which was designed to scare off illegal people from filling out the questionnaire. The Supreme Court, 5-4, ruled that unconstitutional, but they did say it was because of the inept way he phrased the question. In other words, it was clearly political. So, this, if it goes to the courts, will be denied. But he's accomplished his goal. Chilling effect. That's what this is all about.
Pat, isn't Eleanor correct? Whatever the rights of voting, it is clear in terms of the law who should be counted for the purposes of redistricting, no?
I think they're going to count them, Tom, but here's the reason. These folks are illegal. They broke into our country. They broke the law. They're lawbreakers. They're here. And you cannot add lawbreakers to American citizens to get your division, basically, of congressional seats. And that's what's going to happen. They're going to be counted, but they're not going to be included, at least Trump says so, when they start dividing up seats. Now, I think California's got 52 congressional seats. They get 1/3 of all illegal immigrants go running to California because of the bennies. And because of that, therefore, California should increase its delegation. In the United States Congress, no. But I do agree with Eleanor. This is going to be decided in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay, Clarence, your thoughts?
Well, the one irony of this is, according to one survey of the states, this might hurt the red states more than the blue states because they happen to have more undocumented or at least non-citizens. And Eleanor's right. The Constitution does say all are to be enumerated. Happily, we have repealed the part that said all others, meaning black folks, meaning slaves, were going to be counted as 3/5 of a person. But this is a very important ritual that we go through this census, and who gets counted makes a big difference. But mainly, President Trump just wants to do, if you want to call it virtue signaling or vice signaling, whichever side you're on, because his announcement, I think, is rather inconsequential. He is agreeing to count everybody, but he's going to have a separate list for those who are not citizens. And that's kind of a gesture that will do well in the election when a lot of the people who want to crack down on immigration are Trump supporters.
Alexander, isn't the central question here, though, whether undocumented immigrants ultimately should have the right to vote in congressional elections?
Well, it's red meat for the base. This particular question, raising it at this juncture in the campaign, yeah, I suppose that's right, Tom. The question is, do undocumented Americans basically reserve the right to be full citizens ultimately? And Ronald Reagan and an earlier breed of conservatism that was called compassionate conservatism later acknowledged the rights of those folks who had contributed to the economic well-being of our American society. And we've come a long way since then in terms of both the legal and extrajudicial tactics to alienate that population and to attempt to stymie their representative Democratic stake. And if in fact Donald Trump loses re-election this year, I think that there will perhaps be a rebirth of a kind of new conservatism model, a la, Charlie Baker and some of his counterparts in Vermont, in Maryland, and Scott and Hogan, they're well positioned to do that if in fact Donald Trump is really only going to appeal this cycle to 30% of the country.
Okay, so we've got about two minutes. Yeah, Eleanor, go.
Can I say one thing? I just want to point out, Pat said they come to California for the bennies. But these people are the ones who are picking the fruits and vegetables. They're the ones who are working and dying in the chicken factories and the Tyson's factories. They take care of our children. There was a movie, it's a number of years ago, where if all these people stayed home, society would grind to a halt. They're very much a part of the fabric of American life. And, treating them so disparagingly is, I think, I shouldn't be surprised. It's not new, but I really don't think the American spirit is up for this in this particular time during a pandemic.
Pat,
let me talk to that. When I said the bennies, I mean the social welfare benefits, which are higher in California than in.
I knew that's what you meant.
Folks go there, but I was with Ronald Reagan when he signed that bill in 1986. And what he signed was basically an amnesty for about 3 million illegal aliens. He was surprised by the number. And what's happened is people have come across our borders. You got between 11 million and 22 million illegal aliens here, or undocumented immigrants, whatever you want to call them. And these folks are helping decide the destiny of the country, which, according to the Constitution, which Eleanor is greatly attracted to these days, should have been decided basically by the American people and the citizens of the United States. They do good things, there's no doubt about it, but they break the law, they're illegal. They're like folks that move ahead of the line when you're trying to get into a movie or something like that. And the idea that they deserve full rights of citizens is folly.
Okay, all right.
They're trying to get ahead of the line, getting into
who
a
wants
movie.
to come here with
We've got to move on.
response?
We've got to move on. We've got to move on. All right. I think at some point we will have immigration reform, but not for a while. Issue 3, consular clash.
The State Department this week ordered closed China's consulate in Houston, Texas. Used as an operations hub by Beijing's Ministry of State Security Intelligence Service, U.S. officials had become increasingly concerned about the consulate's use as a base for harassment of Chinese Americans. The consulate was also involved in intellectual property theft via its support for cyber teams on the Chinese mainland. China is pledging to respond.
Clarence, another week, another escalation in what appears to be a new Cold War struggle with China.
Indeed it is, and this is, once again, we see really an upping of the ante, if you will. These are old complaints about us having our intellectual property stolen by China. There are new twists now about internal espionage and corporate espionage, including healthcare espionage on the work that's being done here against the coronavirus. The only thing suspicious to me is the timing of this all, because once again, this is election campaign season and a great time to flex our muscles against China. What's going to come of this? Where the ball's in China's court now to see what kind of reciprocation they may make now. But this is all part of the same complex of tensions that we have had in regard to China and that whole Southeast Pacific region, and or rather the China Sea and the whole regional alliances that we're trying to work with.
Alexander, one of the things that's interesting here is the degree to which is this, President Pompeo, as it were, making policy, or is it President Trump? Because, the Secretary of State this week, again on Thursday, making a very aggressive speech about China. How much does this fit in with President Trump's ideal of really a sort of cool level playing field in international relations?
Well, on China, he speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He has two tongues on China, and he's long had two tongues. He initially praised the cooperation of China with respect to COVID, and then he turned 180 and it became the China virus. At the end of the day, whether these moves are being directed by Pompeo or Trump, there really is an incoherent policy. There's on the one hand the bravado, on the other hand the reality, which is that this virus emanating from China is killing Americans and has killed many, many thousands. By the time we're recording this, 150,000 likely Americans. So it's a political issue, and I don't think any kind of tactical diplomatic war games are going to solve Trump's problem, which is he didn't protect Americans from China.
Pat, your thoughts on that idea of Trump and the China and the COVID angle?
I think there's no doubt about it, and we ought to be angry and enraged at what China did, letting it go for weeks on end, which resulted in hundreds of thousands of dead outside of China. That's an outrage. And I think people are right to be upset and angry. But let me say this about Mr. Pompeo. Remember Petraeus's question as he went up to Baghdad. Tell me where this ends. We keep moving in steps against China, putting them down here and there. And no doubt about it, they're a dreadful regime, Communist Party, what they're doing to the Uyghurs, what they're doing in the South China Sea. They're looking for trouble. But the last thing I think we want, Tom, is a hot war with China. And the second to last thing is another Cold War, which lasts us 30 or 40 years face to face with these folks.
Eleanor.
For all Trump's tough talk, he has not made anything better with China. The trade balance is in worse shape, something Pat used to talk about a lot. And the fact that they should not have let the virus get outside of Wuhan province. The world has a right to be angry with them about that, but we have a right to be angry with our president for not stepping up and taking the leadership to protect us from the virus once it got here. And closing the consulate, I think you have to go back a long way, probably to wartime, to find closing a consulate. I mean, this is, it's an extreme measure. There's no subtlety to Trump's approach. I mean, you could tighten screws, you could, put some warnings out here and there. We're going to get into a tit-for-tat exchange now, and the Chinese are much better at it because we are a much more open society. They have lots of ways to mess with us, and we have very few ways to mess with them that aren't way too dangerous.
Clarence, one of the things here that as I understand it, the Houston consulate really was being used as an intelligence station. A lot of harassment face to face of Chinese expats, of Chinese Americans. Ultimately, couldn't you say that President Trump, how much attention he's paid to it, perhaps doesn't matter, but his policy in terms of closing it has stood up for American values? No?
We've been known to use our consulates as espionage bases as well. This is kind of part of the international game. So that's why we have to be careful how we deal with China, because for every move, there's a counter move. And Eleanor's right, they are very good at this game. President Trump likes to keep his tactics as simple as possible. And that means he's going to be, I think, tiptoe around China as much as possible right now, when he's much more comfortable dealing with the domestic issues.
All right, Alexander, you've got 10 seconds concluding.
Yeah, the tragic thing is the ban is what we needed in this instance. I mean, Governor Cuomo needed to shut down the Port Authority. Donald Trump needed to shut the borders comprehensively.
All right. Okay, 10 seconds. Sorry, we're running out of time. Anyway, predictions, Pat.
Joe Biden came out of the basement to declare that Donald Trump is our first racist president. He's going to have trouble with that in the debate, Tom, because about 5 of our first 7 presidents were slave owners, and Woodrow Wilson resegregated the entire federal government and had a White House showing of that great movie. What was it now, Clarence? The movie that celebrated the Klan.
Yes, Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation. So he's going to have to explain that at the debate.
Eleanor.
I just want to mention John Lewis's passing. It took the president a long time to put out a Twitter message. He and John Lewis didn't get along, obviously. The Republicans have been falling all over each other, commemorating his passing, saying how wonderful he was, saint of the Senate, on and on and on. What they need to do is pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. There are 47 Democrats and 1 Republican, Lisa Murkowski, who are on that bill in the Senate, passed the House last December with John Lewis presiding. It will pass. If McConnell doesn't bring it up, a new Senate next year will, and it will pass with a lot of Republican votes.
Alexander, your prediction?
I think we will soon learn that Vice President Biden will use the same logic he did during the course of the primary campaign, play it conservative and smart with his VP selection, and it will be Harris or Warren, steady, well-known establishment figures who still appeal to core constituencies in the party, but to reassure the country that there will be a return to normalcy.
Clarence?
I predict that Chicago's dreadful homicide and violent crime rate will decline with a productive relationship between the U.S. and the feds, or I should say between Chicago and the federal government. And President Trump will take credit for it no matter what happens.
Okay. I just want to point out that the New York Times had another UFO article this week. I'll use that in lieu of my prediction. Anyway, thank you very much for watching.